Welcome to this episode of Resilience Talks, brought to you by the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center, a show where we invite the most relevant stakeholders to discuss issues that have relevance to the resilience of NATO and EU countries. I am Cristian Ghita. I'm the communications coordinator here at the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center, and I will be your host for the day. I invite you, dear viewers, to join me and my fantastic guests in an engaging discussion about how to use the latest technologies to improve forecasting and to bolster resilience. Forecasting is the structured use of all the data that we have available in order to determine trends and to make informed predictions about the future. Now, in an ideal world, the perfect forecasting service would be able to offer perfect analytic products to the perfect decision makers, making it impossible for an adversary to achieve strategic surprise, or more generally the so-called black swan events. Of course, few can imagine that there is such a thing as perfect forecasting, and fewer still others with enough imagination to even picture the perfect decision maker. But recent developments in technology are now promising to offer so much more data and so much more powerful instruments to analyze the data, that forecasting seems to be entering a new era. So we are honored to have with us today somebody who has been instrumental in pushing forward the field of forecasting. Professor Sundri Khalsa, welcome to Resilience Talks.
Thank you.
Dr. Khalsa teaches at the National Intelligence University as well as the US Naval Academy. With an impressive career in the US Air Force, in the FBI, as well as in the Marine Corps, as an intelligence officer, as well as in academia. Dr. Khalsa is a specialist in developing quantitative and statistical methods to improve predictions. Her book, Forecasting Terrorism, Indicators and Proven Analytic Techniques, is used as a manual by both the Marine Corps and the CIA, and has been hailed as a key tool for all who make policy and do intelligence analysis. Also with us, I'm glad to have Mr. Adrian Duta, the Vice-President of the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center. Mr. Duta has held various positions within the Ministry of National Defense of Romania, being an active officer with the rank of Colonel, qualified as an Air Force pilot and intelligence officer. He has also served as a defense attaché to the Hellenic Republic, the Republic of Cyprus, and the Portuguese Republic, as well as the head of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance department, and head of the Defense Intelligence Management Department within the Ministry of National Defense. He is active with the academic community as visiting lecturer at the National Defense University. For his activity, he has been awarded the Medal St. George's Cross, First Class, in 2018 by the Portuguese Chief of Defense, as well as other NATO and national distinctions and medals. Mr. Duta, welcome to your first episode of Resilience Talks.
Thank you.
And with this, I am turning over to our wonderful guests. Dr. Khalsa, what drove the evolution of forecasting as a field from essentially gut feeling to a much more structured, data-based approach?
Frankly, I would say it was primarily the private sector. As I researched best practices, I found them to be primarily in the private sector rather than the intelligence community or in government. In the private sector, I think obviously profit is a powerful motivator, but in addition to that, they have the opportunity to observe the effects of their technique and whether it was actually effective. And can even conduct controlled studies, so you can do an observational study or a controlled experiment and evaluate the success or effectiveness of techniques. And so I found them to be in effective techniques in medicine, geologists, for example, deciding will oil be in the ground there. Also in finance, certainly. And in those fields, they have this advantage of getting quick feedback. On the Intel side, it's more complicated because you have kind of two factors that complicate it. One is the concept that adversaries are essentially seeking to deceive you about the information that you're collecting. So, you know, how do you know that what you're collecting is an accurate answer? And second, there's this concept of the warning paradox where perhaps an intelligence analyst will make an accurate prediction, successfully persuade a decision maker of that prediction. You talked about a perfect decision maker. So this is one of those that actually believed the prediction that was in fact accurate, and then takes action on that information. And then that action itself will cause the adversary to take a different course of action, and now the intelligence analyst appears wrong. So, and then that can degrade the trust that a decision maker has for Intel. So that's also why I advocate for Intel to inform decision makers as much as possible of their accurate predictions to help counter that effect. Because there are certainly plenty of times where we'll say, you know, something will be at a particular location or whatever it is. There are certainly plenty of things that we can show where it was accurate. But you know, the Intel community strategic intelligence has been assessed at being about 30% accurate. But you look at other fields like weather forecasting, up to a certain point, it's like 80% accurate. Obviously, the closer in time, the accuracy increases. In the financial sector, you know, they've got 90% accuracy rates. So other fields have high accuracy rates. So the question is, how can we get those practices into the Intel community to bring us up a little bit more? Obviously, though, the complication is that you're working against a, you know, active thinking, strategic. Yeah, somebody's actively thinking against you. So more complicated for all those reasons. But that's where I'd say drove it. Yeah.
Excellent. So, what would you say is the most significant innovation that has helped push forward the discipline of forecasting? Is it the amount of data that we can collect, or is it the ability to process that data in more powerful or better ways?
I would definitely say it's the ability to process it. Warning failures are rarely due to inadequate collection, more frequently due to poor analysis, and most often due to decision makers ignoring intelligence. And studies also show that when you increase the amount of collection, the analysts can get overwhelmed with information, and then the potential for surprise can actually increase. So analysis is where the greatest gains, I think, have been made and can be made, and particularly with the application of structured technique, as the Intel community has started to embrace that.
Mr. Duta, I would like to get your opinion about the same question. What would you say is the most important aspect of innovation that is helping the intelligence community?
Thank you for your question, Christian. As a practitioner, I can say that forecasting is really a difficult task for an intelligence service or for entity, doesn't matter, it's strategic studies institute or universities. But in time, the technological progress and all the collection sensors and all the assets we have made possible to have a large amount of data to assess, to process. And the most important is that now we have also the program, the software program, to process those data. They are interesting and very important tools for analysts. But again, as a practitioner, I will keep the human intelligence over all this process, because in the end we need to have a human assessment on data that we collected and processed with software and different sensors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very important point that you're making, because it's not just about counting capabilities. From the air, for example, that we just had a very important event talking about GeoInt and the ability of using space assets to collect data. And our guests did make the point that data is extremely abundant. But how then do you extract information from the data, useful, actionable information from the data? And the human aspect is so important, because it's not just about counting the warheads, it's about also knowing how and when the decision makers would use them. Mm-hmm. And that can be very, very different.
I can add that GeoInt is really important for target acquisition. Mm-hmm. And also, speaking about target acquisition, the last word belongs to human, because you can have a very well-designed target, but any mistake could be made by a machine. In the end, a human gave the order and pulled the trigger. And this is really important. But this is not forecasting, this is the operational field.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I think an important distinction, and there has been a bit of a historic debate on the use of intuition versus structure technique in the intel community, and I think some people think that they don't recognize it's a false dilemma. You can actually have something called systematic process that incorporates both intuition and structure technique together. And in a sequenced set of steps, like I propose in what I've written, you have intuition applied at certain steps, such as developing the list of indicators. What should those list of indicators be? Assigning a priority to the indicators. How much weight should they carry in assessing whatever topic you're seeking to assess? And then how do you assess the anomaly level of an indicator? Intuition is used for developing question sets to capture the knowledge of the analysts in recognizing what would change, what would make would characterize an indicator as in a state of anomaly. And then, even if you use automated techniques to roll up these values that maybe an analyst starts plugging in, once you get a computer giving you an overall rating based on a predetermined decision you make, which is good to implement because it helps you overcome biases that might make you rate some information lower when really, in that situation, you have a bias that's causing you to do that, whereas in a generic setting where you're not thinking about it in a particular context, you would actually give something a greater weight. So you allow a computer to help you filter out bias, and then you then still allow a human being to go in and say, yes, I agree with the way that rolled up and that number. And if you keep bringing a human in at every level to quality check the decision the computer made for you based on the programming that you gave it, it helps to counter blindly following what a computer says. So I wholeheartedly agree, and that thought that you can only do structure technique or intuition is mischaracterization. It's important to combine both of them, and you must, because there's qualitative information which needs to be assessed without quantitative method.
But correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So intuition here is a shorthand for experience, situational awareness, everything that an analyst has developed over time in terms of knowledge and getting a sense of the ground, of the operational territory that he's operating on, as opposed to just gut feeling. It's not just that.
Yes, absolutely.
Elusive gut feeling.
Right,
it's
exactly.
Years of experience, knowing what a ship looks like, what a fisherman does when he goes out to sea, as opposed to an arms trafficker or so on.
Exactly. Based on experience, not just a random guess or limited experience and trying to guess. And in fact, studies show 10,000 hours of experience is what gives somebody quality intuition. There have been studies of chess players and taxi drivers and them making assessments in their field, and they're more, this intuition, this effective intuition seems to develop after 10,000 hours of experience in your field. So those are the people that you would want to use to create your indicator lists and to determine how you decide if an indicator has reached an anomalous state. And it's based on, yes, that experience.
That sounds uncannily like the process of training the AI. And that brings me to my next question about the role of AI in forecasting, in the sense that AI needs to be trained on a data set, and the broader the data set, the more accurate the predictions that AI is doing. But will AI be able to draw our attention to threats that we hadn't considered? Or is the AI going to be just as good as the people training it? Will it be able to avoid the failures of the imagination that have plagued the information community, the intelligence community so far, like failing to predict Pearl Harbor, failing to predict 9/11 because they couldn't, because of their innate biases? Will the AI suffer from the same biases, being trained essentially by humans?
Right.
By biased humans.
Right, okay. So I'd like to differentiate two things in this question. Machine learning from this sort of general AI. So with machine learning, that's about pattern recognition, and then that helps with a prediction, and that has actually been quite effective with short-term predictions. And I do think AI is helpful in, for example, helping humans recognize an indicator that they hadn't even thought of, because the AI will look at a data set and you might have, based on your experience, created a particular indicator list, but you didn't detect something that AI or that machine learning is detecting in patterns. Like a pattern demonstrates that this has been present in these scenarios that you care about. So I think it can draw your attention to indicators, which is helping you with the threat. But then with AI, the idea is that this is more broad general AI. It's not so much about the pattern recognition, and it's not a computer acting on if-then statements in a computer code. It's actually learning from its own decision making. And some people characterize it as more akin to raising a child. So you don't actually have control over the decisions it's making, but you have an opportunity to influence them. I do think that AI has the potential to be being more creative and thinking of things that we haven't thought of. I do think that's possible. And on another, so I think that has the potential to be better at the long-term forecasting, which machine learning is not necessarily. But one interesting characterization that someone described was that if AI is seeking to just predict something out in the environment where nobody's kind of working against you in this effort at prediction, then AI can potentially be very successful. But if it's a situation where you have two competing AIs working against each other, then you might run into a situation where it's almost unpredictable. So maybe in some situations, we won't be able to predict. I mean, I guess unless one AI is smarter than the other one. But they're going to be beyond what humans are thinking about. But who knows? Maybe human intuition will somehow see beyond that. I don't know. That's a new world. Yes.
I wonder.
So what do you make of the impact of the AI in the field?
I wonder what if AI will go with disinformation. How will be the impact if the AI will be responsible for disinformation? I think we should have this issue in mind. But I would like to bring in our discussion another issue, a comparison with 9/11, 2001, and February 2022. We remember that the failure for predicting 9/11 was the lack of intelligence sharing and cooperation between the services. And the situation is different now. We have artificial intelligence, we have machine learning, we have another capacities of our IT technology, and we can use them as a very good tool to process and analyze. But at that time, we have been in a different situation, and you probably remember that just a few days before the invasion, the British intelligence service, the US intelligence service predicted exactly the day when the Russians will invade Ukraine. It's a different approach, because at this time we can discuss about the ability and the capability of an intelligence service to predict with accuracy an event that will occur. In the past, we didn't have this ability. In conclusion, I think the artificial intelligence is a very good tool for intelligence services, but not only, for all the entities that are trying to forecasting and to foresight, to make the strategic foresight.
And that goes to banking sector and all the other fields that Dr. Khalsa has mentioned in the beginning about where geological services, financial sector.
Yes, the applicability of this technology is available for all the sectors, and it will be a new revolution, let's say, from this point of view. Actually, I think this is concern of our scientists about the pace of development of the technology, and the difference between the pace that humans could regulate this issue, and we have to be careful with this aspect.
Indeed. And also adding to an insightful point he made about how prediction has been accurate in many cases where a decision maker chose to ignore an accurate and then Intel people perceive that Intel was wrong because people don't know that nuance that happened. And so that brings me to actually want to circle back to one of your previous questions about what has been the biggest advance in forecasting. Is it the collection or the analysis? And there's another step, which is the communication to decision makers. And that has failed significantly. And that is an area that I think we're making good advances, but I think that's an area that needs to be focused on further to improve that major problem that has happened many times.
Yeah, that's more a problem of evolution of the system rather than bringing in an innovation that's going to dramatically improve the way a politician is looking at an analysis that's brought to his desk.
Yes.
So the perception of threat is what informs the questions that we ask. Again, because we have a lot of data, so how do we relate to that data? How do we extract the information we need from that data? What is, in your opinion, the threat that we should pay most attention to that perhaps we don't consider in everyday parlance?
Well, I'll give you a top three because who knows what all the variables are, how they end up playing out to see which one becomes actually the greatest one. But I would say in a top three, there is the danger that is associated with the advent of digital currencies. So I think it's inevitable that money will be digitized. And I would say that there are kind of three primary options in that choice. And I think that a lot of nations and free individuals don't know the implications of that choice. They're just not aware of what the implications of each choice are and what the dangers of some of those choices are. And so I characterize this decision as so significant because money is the primary tool of an economy and can destroy an economy and a government if it fails. So I'd say one of the most important economic decisions nations have ever faced, and second, an extremely important security decision. So I say it for these three reasons. First, as I mentioned, money is the primary tool of an economy. It can destroy an economy and a government if it fails. Second, money is the fundamental tool that a government uses to maintain its security forces. So if the money fails, then security forces become extremely weak or fail. Second, all nations are facing this choice simultaneously, so any nation's individual choice is immediately in comparison, in like a direct comparison of every other country's choice. And then also, never before have we seen forms of money that have such extremely different implications on government power. So in one extreme, you have central bank digital currency, which essentially gives a government unhindered power to control money. And even if that began with benevolent policies and software, the problem is it's always vulnerable to corruption, and it gives total power over money. And of course, corruption philosophy says absolute power corrupts absolutely. So it's just highly vulnerable to really bad corruption.
Or authoritarian tendencies.
Yes, exactly. Instant freezing, instant seizure, instant taxation, controlling exactly where you can spend it, how much you can spend, all of that, exactly. The alternative that is a completely opposite extreme is Bitcoin or something like it.
So in your evaluation, what are the threats that we should be paying attention to?
I would like to put in context what Professor Khalsa said. I think one of the most important threats to our global stability is the competition between the great powers and all the tools that they use, the hybrid threats together with the classical one that brings to us the nuclear threats at the highest level possible in history. And imagine what that blockchain and cryptocurrency to be used by terrorists. Terrorism is also on the very high level of priority when we talk about the responsibility of the intelligence services to assess the indicators and warnings. And speaking about technology, this is really helpful to have very accurate assessment on these indicators, because they are useful for us to know if it's a regular situation, if it's normal, we can stay without any concern about what is going to happen, or it's orange and red when the security is in danger. I think it's really important to pay attention to technology, to put the emerging and evolving technology to work for us, not to let the technology to become disruptive and dangerous for our security situation.
Okay, so carrying on this topic of great power competition, we have to ask a specialist in forecasting, where do you see China in the next 10 years?
So I will answer this with what I see influencing China's future and how it influences it, but I don't want to claim that it will happen within 10 years, but I do predict that based on a particular decision, this is what would happen. In the end, I predict that countries that choose a central bank digital currency will fall like the Roman Empire, and countries that choose Bitcoin will gain the world's wealth. People will move their money there instead, where that is an option. And that where central bank digital currency is chosen, eventually the currency will be debased because governments historically have been unable to resist the ability, the temptation to implement money printing. It's known as the hidden tax. People aren't quite aware of the fact that their money is being debased, and so then the government has obtained more money from money printing, but the value of their money has gone down, so it's a kind of hidden form of tax. And so over time, the idea is that the currency will be debased and the government will become weaker. Meanwhile, people who are oppressed with central bank digital currency will eventually push back on the government, and that it won't last. So I don't see, if China is using this central bank digital currency, that their power lasting forever with that. But maybe it would take more than 10 years for that to flip.
Mr. Duta, what's your take on China?
Speaking about China, I have to emphasize that China is one of the challenges that NATO already mentioned in the strategic concept. And this issue comes after the common assessment that China is following the fundamental objective to become proeminent in the region and also a global power. China doubled the defense budget, and they are doing now a very intensive armed forces reform. And apart from this, they are on their path to develop the technological field, and they have very good results in this field. Hopefully China will be the right side of history and will continue to do whatever it needs to contribute to the development of global well-being. The President Xi Jinping is at his third mandate, and definitely he has a clear vision about where China should be in 10 years. Remain for us to see if it's the same vision with us.
I see. You were mentioning state conflict as interstate competition as being one of the major threats. And we kind of lost sight of terrorism, which has been the focus of your work for a long time. Is this new age of interstate competition sucking some of the oxygen from the terrorist movement? Where do you see the evolution of the terrorist movement going forward?
Well, I think there will continue to be state sponsors of terrorism. And if you have a scenario where it's two powers of, kind of equal power, I think even those situations will have one of those equal powers employing techniques for terrorism because they can avoid, in some cases, response and retaliation because they can, obfuscate who was behind it. So I think
to some extent, I mean, Iran being behind.
Yes, we're quite aware of what Iran sponsors agreed and other countries. So to a certain extent, new technology might bring about ways for terrorists to better obfuscate that, and then it's more difficult to get a coalition to agree to respond if it's not absolutely clear that this is the culprit. So I think that complication might come into play. And then I think when you have an asymmetric situation where there's a strong power and a weaker power, I think terrorism will continue to be a tool of the weaker power as well.
But you are framing it in this greater narrative of power against power as opposed to the asymmetrical narrative that we've had so far.
Yeah, I'm saying for both scenarios, I still see a weaker power versus a stronger power, the weaker power using terrorist methods against it. And then if you take this, we're still going to have conflicts between nations of somewhat equal power and nations of differing power. And I'm saying what I think happens in both of those scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you think that terrorism is going to ever again attempt statehood like the Islamic State is trying to do? Where do you see the evolution of terrorism?
Terrorism, in my opinion, remains one of the most one of the threats to the international security, and we witnessed the loss of some leaders of the terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda in 2022. Also, they lost the access to money and they lost territorial advantages. But the terrorism remains one of the most important threats. And we have to pay attention because the situation in Afghanistan, it's new, and Afghanistan could become again hotbed for terrorists. We have there the ISIS Khorasan that are fighting with Taliban, but we should not miss the point that that area could create another terrorist group or to contribute to the development of the group that act in that country. And it's really important to understand that the security situation, that it's not very safe in an area, could bring some of the terrorist groups to act in that area and to develop without any restriction.
Mm-hmm. And carrying on this issue of terrorism, sometimes state-sponsored terrorism, sometimes states themselves acting like terrorists. What's your take on the future of the conflict in Ukraine?
Conflict in Ukraine, it's the biggest threat we have in vicinity, and we are deeply involved, and we pay attention to this issue. From the center, Euro-Atlantic Center for Resilience, we are in contact with our partners there, and we try to do our best in order to support their capacity to resist and to improve their resilience. It's admirable what we've seen, because since 2014 till now, Ukraine succeed to have a better training and preparation, and they are in a better condition now to resist those atrocious attacks from Russian soldiers. It's really hard to predict if the conflict in Ukraine will end soon or will last for a long time, because we have two enemies with different possibilities. Let's say Russia, even that proved to be a big surprise from military perspective, they still have a lot of resources, and they could produce very big damages to the Ukrainian people. On the other side, Ukraine received a lot of support from international community, and this definitely should continue to defend their territory and to be able to resist, because the fight, the Ukrainian fight, it's survival one. They don't have any other chance than to fight, and this is our role to support them and to help them. Probably it's better to think what are the best ways to support them in order to be winners in this conflict.
Thank you. Dr. Khalsa, what's your take on this war, which is the most important thing happening in this side of the world right now?
So I think alliances are clearly what create very strong resilience for a country. And thankfully, the Ukraine has the backing of a very strong alliance. And that's another reason that I am excited about this organization here, because of the way that it develops and cultivates alliances. And leave it at that.
Thank you. Dear viewers, this concludes our episode for the day. We've had a very interesting talk. Thank you, Dr. Khalsa. Thank you, Mr. Duta. And we'll be with you next time for another very interesting episode of Resilience Talks.